Hello everyone, this is a follow-up video. The first video was all about downloading and using the pre-built AI model to read invoices in Power Automate. So that flow was downloaded and tested and used. Now I want to change a few of those actions and triggers on that flow to make this flow more custom to my needs. So let's get into it. Here is the flow untouched, exactly how it was downloaded. So we've got the 5 steps. And the first thing I want to do on this flow is that I want to remove that manual trigger to become a trigger that it is going to start this flow when an email arrives with a certain criteria. So to do that, we're going to click on that trigger. And here we can right click and click on delete. Otherwise, we can click on the 3 dots and delete here. So that is going to remove that trigger, but every flow needs a trigger. So let's add a trigger. And here I'm going to type when an email arrives. And I want to select the Office 365 Outlook trigger, which is right here. If you do not see it, you can click on See More. And here are all the triggers that you can select from. So let's click on Show All to expand the advanced parameters. And let's fill in the criteria for this email that we wanted to start my flow. So generally, there's a specific email address that should be receiving those invoices. Generally, there's a solid vendor email address. For this scenario, I'm just going to use a test email. And then the criteria is that this email has to have an attachment. The subject line needs to include the word invoice. And this is only going to run if there's attachments on an email. So that is the first trigger of my flow. Next, I want to add an action. So here I'm going to click on the plus sign, add an action. And here I want it to get the attachments from the trigger. So here I will select Get Attachments. And it's asking for 2 items, the message ID. So I'll use dynamic content and I'm going to type in ID. And right in here you can see there is a message ID option. And then below is attachment ID. Again, I'll use dynamic content and I will select the ID, attachment ID. There we go. So once I did that, it adds a for each loop around this action, meaning for every attachment, it's going to run these steps. So when the first step is when an email arrives with that criteria, get each attachment. After it gets each attachment, I want it to start extracting the information from each attachment, which will be each invoice. So below here, we have the extract information from invoices, and I'm going to click and drag that up into my for each loop. Now I'm going to click on the extract information from invoice action. And here it's requiring an invoice file. So let's add that. We'll click on the dynamic content. And here we're going to look for the content bytes. Here we go, content of attachments. So now that action is good to go. After it gets all of the information from the invoice, I do not need it to create a table for my scenario. So I'm going to click on this, right click and delete. And I also do not need it to get my profile information, so I will delete this one as well. All right, so now after it extracts the information from my invoice, I'm going to click on the plus sign to add another action. And what I want to do is I want to add a control. So I can click control here, or I can type in the word condition. That's the type of control I'm looking for. So here is condition. And in here, I want to add what is my condition. So after it extracts the information from the invoice, I wanted to find the vendor name. So I'll click here on dynamic content and see more. And I can scroll all the way down until I find vendor name. Here is vendor name. And I want this flow to run if this vendor name equals Valentine, Smith, and Beck. And let's add a second criteria. And the dynamic content of, let's go with invoice amount. So I can also type it in instead of scrolling. And we're going to make sure we pick the one that says invoice total in the number format. And the criteria for this is going to be if the invoice is less than $6,000. All right, so it got the attachment. It's reading the attachment, and if the attachment has these 2 things, that means it would be true. So what do I want it to do when it's true? let's repurpose this send an email. So I'm going to click, drag, and drop it under my true. And if that criteria is true, let's change this action. So the first thing is I want this to send an email to my accounting team, would be an example. Since we are still testing, I'm going to use my own email address here. And let's change the subject line. So the subject line is going to be invoices approved and payment is required. Let's select all and delete the body of the email. And let's put in something a little bit more generic. So because that is my criteria and I approve it, I'm going to add an email in here that says, hey, accounting team, please find that invoice that's attached. It's good to go. Please make sure you pay it on our next standard procedure, next standard check run. So that is looking good. And then down here, it's originally looking for that attachment from the first trigger. So let's just clear that out. And now we can save our flow. All right, now that that's saved, let's go back to that send an email action and let's make sure we add the attachment. So let's click on show all again. Here we're going to add a new attachment. We're going to use that dynamic content and we're going to look for the get attachments name of the file. And then for attachment content, we are also going to use that get attachments content bytes. And now I can save again. Okay, so now that that's saved, let's click over here. We're going to right click and copy an action. And now we're going to add another action, but this time we're going to paste the action I just copied. And this is going to be the false side of it. So if the criteria is not for that vendor or for a higher amount than 6,000, it's going to send me an email. And then this is going to just give me a heads up that this did not meet the automation and the criteria and that I need to give this a little bit more attention. And I also listed a few ideas or suggestions on what I should be reviewing. Because I copied and pasted this action, the attachment is still included on this email. So let's click save one more time. All right, so technically this flow is good to go. We could start testing it right away. Oh wait, I'm sorry. Here, let's change the format of the body of the email. It looks like when I click saved, it lost some of my headers and paragraph formatting. So let's fix that. And that what I would say is just a bug. It's not anything I did intentionally on purpose, but when I click save, something happened there. So let's make sure I click save before I move on to the next one. Okay, good. So let's go to this one as well. This one also lost that paragraph formatting. So let's add those again. Okay, save one more time. Great. Okay, so now this flow is good to go. We can start running and testing it. There are some things that I would like to share that are best practices. So I think we should start with scrolling all the way to the top of this flow. And each of these actions and triggers can be renamed instead of that default name. So here it says when an email arrives, V3, but I'm going to make this a little bit more unique so that if I ever need to reference this flow in the future, it's a little bit more clear and easy to understand exactly what is going on. So you can see I changed that trigger title. Here I'm also going to change the get attachment action. And like I said, that would be best if you changed it for all of them to make sure that you are as clear as possible and you can kind of save time in the future. Got two more. I've got that email down here. This is going to be that approval email. It meets the criteria. Everything's good to go. And here is that email did not meet the criteria and it's going to need more manual review. And let's click save again. All right, so each action has a customized name, but you can actually change these gray boxes as well. So for each, I can call it out that it's going to be for each attachment on the email. And then for the condition, I can also state that this is the vendor name that I'm looking for and the amount needs to be less than the $6,000. So not required, but highly recommended to change all of those. So now let's click save. And let's test our flow. We're going to click Test. We're going to go with Manual and Test. So now here, I've drafted an email from one email to a different email address. In the subject line, I put the word invoice. There can be more text in there. And here I've attached 2 invoices. Here's that first invoice that should meet the criteria. It's less than $6,000 and it's from the vendor specified. And then for testing purposes as well, I added a second invoice to this email, a different vendor, but this one is under that $6,000 mark as well. So let's click Send here. Here is my Outlook, and there is the email that has just arrived. So here it says it came from that specific email address I called out in the flow, and it came to me. So if I go to the flow, now you can see it's kicked off and running. So it found the email, and then you can see down below it says Get Attachments from the email. There's 2 of them, exactly 2 attachments. So if I scroll down, you can see that the first of 2 attachments, it met the criteria and sent the approval email. And if I click Next, you can see it got the attachment and it didn't meet the criteria, therefore it sent the other email here. All right, so there you can see the 3 emails. Here's the approval email, and then next is the attachment. You can see the attachment is on there as well. So my accounting team should be able to take this information and pay the invoice. Here's the second email saying that it needs a little bit more attention and that I should check it over. And here's that attachment showing as well that it's a different vendor with that amount. Something I don't like is that it says low importance for both of these, so I do want to take that off. And then also, I don't need that original email anymore because all of the attachments were processed. So I would be okay if it would delete that first email that came from the vendor. So let's go back to the flow and let's click Edit and make those few changes here. So let's start with going to those emails that are created, and we're going to click below where it says Show All. And here I'm going to look for the importance. And I'm going to assign the importance as normal instead of that low message that's coming through. And here again, we'll do it for each one of them. So outside of the For Each box, let's add an action. And this is where I'm going to add that delete an email action. All right, here's that delete. And what message is it going to look for and delete? Well, it's going to be the first one that triggered this flow to start. So if I type ID, I'll select message ID. And now I'll click Save. All right, now let's test this flow one more time. So test, we're going to go with manually triggered this time. We'll use the trigger that just happened and is successful. And now we'll click Test. All right, so let's scroll back to the top. It found that email, the same criteria. And if I go into my email, you can see that I got that approval notice right away. So that first attachment worked well. The first email was deleted, and there's my second email. So the flow now ran as expected, and you can see that low importance has now been removed. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that video. It was a pleasure making that for you guys. If you have any other questions, please reach out. Suggestions in the future on different tutorials, I would love to hear them.